could I describe Peleliu? Probably the toughest campaign in World War II.
Well, I would say that it was almost indescribably and intensely horrible, almost beyond imagination.
An island on fire. Over 10,000 Japs waiting for 9,000 riflemen.
Peleliu is a horrible place for a Marine. The Japanese are furious fighting people, you know. I mean, they don't go down, they don't issue them white flags away.
September 15, 1944. The 1st Marine Division, veterans of Guadalcanal and Cape Gloucester, invade the island of Peleliu, 500 miles east of the Philippines. They walk into a living hell. This is the story of Company K, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marine Regiment. Their tale is one of unparalleled savagery. The haunting saga of Peleliu is emblazoned in the annals of Marine Corps history. For those who were there, it cannot be forgotten.
This was no campaign like Peleliu. Much has been written about it in the higher echelons, among generals and so forth, comparing it to Iwo Jima or Tarawa, and they all admit that there was nothing quite like Peleliu. It was the biggest surprise I think the Marine Corps received in World War II. We just had never known an enemy like this.
The Japanese fought in a manner that was much better than they did in other battles in the Pacific. They didn't have any glorious banzai charges or anything else like that. They fought a very well-planned defensive battle. I'm sure they knew from the beginning they were probably going to eventually lose, but they also realized that in losing they were going to take a hell of a lot of us with them. And that's the way they fought it. And that's also why I think it became such a vicious battle. Because the Japanese didn't give up. They died first. They died.
You ask someone, or you told them that you fought on Peleliu, and they'll say, Peleliu? Where in the hell is Peleliu? Tarawa was one of the most fierce battles that the press said that, you know, there ever was in the Pacific. The 1st Marine Division lost more men the first 3 days on Peleliu than they lost total on Tarawa, and our battle had only started in 3 days. But nobody knew about it, and nobody knows about it today.
A 1st Division axiom was that nothing ever came easy. Preparation for the invasion of Peleliu began on Pavuvu, north of Guadalcanal, a rain-soaked, rat-infested coconut plantation where the living and training conditions were far from ideal.
Pavuvu was supposed to be a rest area. Instead, I think it was more like a combat area, except there were no snipers in the trees. But that might be what bonded us so close to one another. The deprivation. We were deprived of everything. Walking around ankle deep, sometimes knee deep in water.
Sleeping in jungle hammocks and typhoon, water running over the island, you know, and everything, and the pets on the place with the land crabs. I mean, the big red land crabs, and we managed to live with them. We didn't conquer them, but we lived with them.
The morale was very bad at that time. There was hardly a night after taps where you didn't hear a shot being fired. And you'd wonder, who was it? Who committed suicide? And sure enough, it was somebody that got a Dear John letter. That happened so often.
September 4. The invasion force sails for Peleliu. 2,100 miles to the northwest. The passage is long, hot, and uncomfortable. But as the days pass, each man focuses on the job he has to do.
Like every Marine, I was primarily a rifleman, and of course qualified with the M1 rifle. But my weapons specialty, as it was called, was a 60 millimeter mortar. And it was my job to take the shells and put the proper charge on the base up between the fins, pull the safety wire, and drop them in when he said fire.
And what I did, I was the observer for the mortar section. And I would go up and pick me a high spot, and then I would direct fire, give the orders from my position back to the gun position. I was a squad leader at the time on Peleliu, and I felt responsible for those men and the men that was under my jurisdiction or under my command.
I was on Peleliu, I was a bazooka operator. And a bazooka was the grandfather of all rocketry, at least as far as our military is concerned. And at the time, it was a kind of weapon that the military and the Marine Corps was still trying to determine what's the extended use of this particular weapon.
I was Browning automatic rifleman, so I guess that's the job. I'd say it was the most automatic that we had in those days of infantry riflemen. So we had one Browning man with every 4 men. So that's 3 riflemen and a Browning, which would make up a fire team.
I was a rifleman scout, and that meant you ran out to the lead. We were a fire team leader. He was a rifleman also. I was his assistant. Actually, we were out there as almost a tease to the enemy to draw fire.
September 15, 0830 hours. After 2 days of heavy naval and aerial bombardment, the assault on Peleliu begins. Landing craft carrying men of the 1st, 5th, and 7th Marine Regiments attack 1,000 yards of heavily defended beach.
One of the things that I think some people don't realize was the noise was absolutely indescribable. The intensity of the noise. And you couldn't even talk to the guy next to him. You had to grab him and yell in his ear. And I thought I was gonna, wet my pants, which sometimes happens with people. And that moment the Amtrak started in was the turning point of my life. I mean, everything before it just pales in comparison to what happened later.
There is absolutely no way that any one human being can imagine how much firepower has gone in on that beach while you were coming in. And you would think, my God, a rat couldn't live out there unless that's a Jap. You think it would kill them all, absolutely annihilate the whole thing.
I didn't think anybody could live. The island seemed to be on fire. Black smoke, fire, actual flames lit underneath it.
We was going along there, and the shells was falling to our left, to our right, behind us, and in front of us. And all of a sudden, we hit a coral reef and stopped dead still. And we was sat there just for a few seconds before we got it, to going. And just as we pulled out, there was a shell hitting directly in front of us, just a short ways out. And I still think to this day, if we hadn't have hung that coral reef, we'd have walked right straight into that one.
God, we were sitting ducks, and stranded out, 2 tractors full of Marines stranded out in the water, because those tractors had no covers over the top. It was just open top, and so our driver panicked, and he couldn't get the gears moving. And so Johnny Marmette, who was our platoon sergeant, stuck his Tommy gun in the guy's back and said, I could hear Johnny yell, if you don't get this goddamn tract out of here, I'm gonna kill your ass.
what made Peleliu bad then at the landing is that we couldn't get out of the water. So here comes the next wave, and then the next wave. And finally, you know, we begin to get on shore, but this is where we got the confusion of all kinds of companies and people and everything all just amassed because the wave's got to come on in, whether you're out of the way or not. You know, I mean, another wave of men are coming. You know. As I learned later, they wanted to get something like 4,000, 5,000 men on shore in something like 30 or 40 minutes.
To me, one of the most tragic sights I ever saw during the whole war was Marines getting out of knocked out Amtraks and trying to wade ashore and just getting mowed down by Japanese machine gun fire. And I mean, that was just enough to make you weep.
I was in the first wave, and I was lucky because they let us in. But I could see from the Amtraks behind us, some refer to them as alligator. Some of them were taking direct hits, and each Amtrak carried roughly 20 to 25 men in it.
There were only 9,000 infantrymen. The 1st Marines, the 5th Marines, my regiment. The 7th Marines each had about 3,000 men. So that's 9,000 infantry, and there were almost 11,000 Japs on the island.
Tank driver said, you know, this is it. Out you go. Jerks the handle. Ramp went down, and we're still in the water. One boy right ahead of me, he come out and just swung around the corner of the tank. Got him right through the ears. A small firepower. Understand, he just crawled right back to the tank. The tank driver cranked it up, took him right on back out.
But I was supposed to be the first man out on the right side. And when my fire team leader looked at me, and the apprehension I had, he said he'd go first. I wouldn't let him do that, of course, my pride. But before anything was done, the Amtrak went up to the beach and lurched back, and at the same time, the ramp fell down, and we all went rolling right out with sweaty faces, because the heat was unbearable, and rolled right into the sand.
Oh, when you land on a beach, the confusion is terrible. Now, I went off on the right side of the tractor. One of the guys in our special weapons squad went off the left side of the tractor. He got tied up with eye-cover and was killed on the beach. We went off on the right side, and we hit the soft spot.
When I fell off the side of the tractor, I just fell onto the sand in a heap. You know, all mortar ammo bag, canteens, and carbine, and of course I had a 45 and a K-bar, and it was certainly not the way John Wayne hit beaches. And a corpsman came crawling over because he thought I was hit, and he put his hand on my shoulder to roll me over, and I thought, oh my God, it's a nip. So I tried to, because they would sometimes come out of, you know, the emplacements right after Amtrak's landed if they could. But so I tried to get my K-bar out, and luckily I couldn't, because I guess I would have carved up the corpsman.
And a lot of guys were stacked up on the beach. They were just lying there. And my first desire was to get off that beach, because the nips were very good with mortars.
You could see tractors to the right and left getting knocked out, and bodies blown up in the air.
And so I just moved ahead, and some of the riflemen had already started moving out, so I was following them. And then we went over into a big tank ditch trap, and there were some guys gathered there, and then we moved out of there, and we started going through the brush along the south part of the airstrip.
Later on in the afternoon, as we had moved away from the airfield, off to our position close to the 7th Regiment, we started to see the water and beach on the west side of the island. And there were many Japs that were out in the water, fleeing from actually a little cut. And we started firing at them.
It was after we moved inland and saw the ridge system that we realized that no matter how much bombardment they had thrown at it, it would not have neutralized the artillery pieces that they had in place in the ridge system, most of which had steel doors on them.
We all landed with 2 canteens of water. Each canteen is a quart, so we were walking around with a half a gallon. Between 8:30 when we landed on D-Day to 12 or 1 o'clock in the afternoon, nobody had any water left. The heat, I understand, went up to 118 degrees that day. For the rest of the day, water seemed to be the biggest problem.
Well, we were completely out of water. And along in the middle of the night, this guy that I was in the hole with, he says, God, I don't have any water. You have any water? I said, no. And we used to, all of us carried 2 canteens, but it was so hot on that island, it's just unbelievable. 100, 105, 110 degrees, and very, very humid. And so I thought, well, it's only 7 feet between our foxholes, and I'll just crawl over there. And so I was calling, hey, Gene, hey, Snafu, and no sound. So I thought, well, hell, I'll crawl over there. So I crawled the 6 or 7 feet, and as Gene tells the story, he kept asking for the password.
And the password that night was Chevrolet. The password always had an L in it, and it was Chevrolet that night, I think. And there was no answer. And so I took up the trigger slack and aimed right square at the, what would be the center of the head of the silhouette.
Well, I didn't hear anything. And it was very quiet, too, as I remember. And, but as I peered over the edge of the foxhole, here were Gene and Snafu, and they were lying back in the foxhole, and Gene had his .45 up here, and he says, you dumb son of a bitch, I damn near shot you.
And then I said, what in the hell are you doing crawling up on me at night in the pitch dark? And he said, well, I'm thirsty. Have you got any water? And I said, yeah, I got some water, but God damn it, I nearly shot you.
The next morning, practically everybody starved to death for a drink of water. We filled our our canteens with water from gasoline, 5-gallon cans that gasoline had been stored in.
Unfortunately, nobody had cleaned out the drums.
It had oil and rust in it. When you drank it, it hit the bottom of your stomach and you got cramps immediately.
The water was so tainted, many of the men got very, very sick from it because it was not fresh water. All you could taste was that oil base.
And, you take a drink, and then I think if you'd have blew your breath and lit a match, you'd have just went up in flames.
The second day, D+1, and we were supposed to, one of the 5th Regiment's assignments was to take the airfield. Then they told us to move out and not to stop anything. And a few shells started falling, and then we started across. We had no more than gotten, I guess, 25 yards, and then they opened up the machine gun fire. Till this day, I don't know how any of us got across it, because I looked to the right of me and to the left of me, and lines of white traces were coming past me, just like the railing on a chair or something, and it was waist high. And I was reciting the 23rd Psalm, and Snafu was right next to me, and I couldn't hear what he was saying, but most of it was cussing. And the worse it got, the more I'd pray, and the worse he'd cuss. To me, I thought, this must be what it's like to be in the middle of a tornado.
And I believe that was in my complete Marine Corps dealings. I believe that I was as scared as I was ever scared going across that open airstrip and listening to the bullets whining and the artillery shells are going and the battle in full rage. That was the longest walk that I've ever taken in my life, right there, barring none.
Fear is probably the word. You fella ought to feel fear. Kind of tell the difference between scared and fear.
I never knew that I would survive. I never had the feeling that my life was in some way charmed, that I was going to survive the battle.
I think everybody that went in expected that he'd be the one, like winning a lottery ticket. You know, I bought the ticket, and I'm the one that's going to win.
You know, you've heard these people say, you know, I prayed a lot, or I prayed a lot, you know, for this or that whenever I was there. I never did pray a lot whenever we were there. I just had a kind of a standard deal that I carried with me throughout the complete ordeal. I just say, God, I'm in your... I just say, God, I'm in your hands. Take care of me.
I was talking to Lieutenant Hillbilly Jones, who was a machine gun platoon lieutenant. I was talking to him about the fact that I seemed to be more afraid than a lot of the other people. And he said, don't worry about it, Sledgehammer. It's just that you don't mind admitting it, and they're just not saying anything about it. And that's when he told me that bravery was controlled fear. And then Sergeant Teskovich came over, and the three of us sat there and warmed up some coffee with little steno tablets before it got dark, and we're drinking the coffee, and all of a sudden I heard a voice say, just as clear as we're talking here, you will survive the war. And I said, did y'all hear that? And Hillbilly said, no, what did you hear, Sledgehammer? And I said, well, you didn't hear anybody say anything? And Teskovich said, no, all I heard was a machine gun off to the left.
I thought I was indestructible. I was young enough to believe that, too. Until I was wounded later on in the campaign. That came as a complete surprise to me. In fact, I've never been so angry in my life.
After securing the airfield, the primary objective for the Marines on Peleliu is the Brogels, a series of coral ridges dominating the north-south spine of the island. There, in ingeniously camouflaged caves, bunkers, and pillboxes, the Japanese waited.
They set up in their defense on Peleliu and said, come get us. Come get us. You're going to have to rout us out of this place. We're not coming out.
When I think of the Brogel, it's Brogel mountain range. It went from 100, 200 feet high of sharp coral. And in there were 500 caves, over 500 caves. Now, this is only possibly a mile long and a quarter mile wide. And in that congestion, you have over 10,000 Japanese waiting for you.
To get the Japs out of the caves, well, we had to learn that. Because initially you think it was a cave, say, back home in Kansas or somewhere, it would just be a hole in the ground, but theirs was more like these ant farms and things where they had several exits. So initially, you know, I called the flamethrowers up. Or the boys with the packs on their back, and the portable flamethrowers, you know. Shoot the flamethrower in the cave entrance, and you know, once in a while you might get a Jap or so. You generally get ammunition popping inside. Actually, a flamethrower, not to be contradicted, but I believe you can shoot a flamethrower across the mouth of the cave and you'll get people inside because it sucks the oxygen right out of the area.
You'd fire the flamethrower in one cave, and you'd see the flames licking out of the entrance to the other. So you knew that the flamethrower had done the job, and there was no escape. There was no escape from that at all. Horrific. The most horrible weapon we had was that flamethrower.
You get mean. You really do. You get mean. You want to kill them. They're killing you. You want to go after them. I never ever looked at the type of weaponry we used as being immoral or wrong. It was a way to kill the enemy.
I had personal feelings toward the Japs. They were ruthless as far as I was concerned. They just didn't kill a Marine, they would mutilate him with their bayonets or knives or whatever. I've seen Marines that's tied up to a tree and literally filled full of holes that they had just stuck him up there and just keep shooting him instead of just killing the man. And I've seen men with their heads cut off, their testicles cut out, bayonets through their bodies, where any one of the wounds that he had received would kill him. But they were a very brutal enemy.
I think I began to realize that it was going to be a lot longer battle than we expected when we started going up the West Road. And knowing that the Japs still hadn't been cleared out of that area around Bloody Nose and the Five Sisters and so on, and that we were beginning to surround them rather than going straight at them.
September 25. The 5th Marine Regiment moves north along the West Road. The goal of General William Rupertus and Division Command is to capture a small airstrip on Negligible Island, a few hundred yards offshore.
Yeah, Negligible was quick, it was fast, it was over with. We were only there 2 days.
When we assaulted the beach on Negligible, we went in about, I would say, 250 to 300 yards. Sledgehammer noticed that these Japs were in this pillbox that we were setting their motors up right beside of it. So I told the guys just to take cover and to not let any of them out. Like damn sure none of them escaped. And I went back and got an Amtrac with a 75 Hauser gun on it, and also called for a flamethrower. So the Hauser came up and he knocked holes through those bunkers. The flamethrower came in then and he scorched them. And then after the flamethrower and the 75 Hauser had pulled back and the ones that had came out were gunned down, I went down inside the bunker, and there was still one Jap that was laying up on top of everybody else, and he didn't look exactly like I thought a dead man should look. So I took my left foot and stuck it in his right shoulder and gave him a kick. And whenever I did, I found out that he wasn't alive. I mean, wasn't dead at all. So I finished that one off right quick.
A Jap came running out of a cave, about, I'd say, no more than 25, maybe 25 feet in front of me. I had just thrown a grenade in. Somebody said that they had seen a few Japs run down into this cave. I couldn't see the cave because there was a hole in the floor, and went down and under into this ridge. I had to throw the grenade off the bank shot, in basketball, be the same, into the hole. It exploded, and in almost seconds, up came a Jap running at me, hollering in perfect English, "Here I am, Marine. Here I am, kill me." I was so startled, I just kept firing from the waistline. 8 shots as fast as I could pull that trigger on my M1 rifle. But he still got a grenade off. And he got it off by, it had a pinning mechanism, and he hit his helmet. And no sooner had it left his hand, it exploded in the air between he and I. And I caught a piece of shrapnel in the eye and the head, and a piece in the chest. And it also knocked me out for a moment. Now, other Japs came up because when I awoke, I saw this Jap crawling in front of me. He was falling actually across from me, not toward me. And I immediately reloaded my M1 and fired, laying down into his body until he stopped moving. And what happened to the other Japs whether the grenade I threw in had killed them, I don't know. But I was evacuated at that point.
October 6, the 5th Marine Regiment and Company K are thrown back into the Ummerbrogels. With the 1st and 7th Regiments decimated by heavy losses, the 5th takes control of the attack on the pocket, 1,200 yards long, 400 yards wide.
You couldn't even see where the fire came from. And you began to wonder, well, how in the hell are we going to knock those positions out if you just got just this maze of coral rock up there that had been covered with vegetation? It was now all blasted off. It was obvious to us that we had absolutely hit a stone wall, and we're just battering ourselves to pieces against the
Just fire, machine gun fire, BAR fire, M1 rifle fire, Jap fire. You could hear the bullets singing off of the coral rock, from the enemy side of it. Men getting wounded, men hollering for corpsmen. It was hell for some time on that ridge, I'll tell you.
We'd cussed the ground, we'd cussed the weather, we cussed the terrain. It was in the jungle, which is, there's a damn tree. Down there, we cussed the coral rock. We continually cussed the Japs.
When you knew you had them beaten and there was nowhere they could go, and then still, by God, they killed, and you could not get them to surrender. And just fury built up in you. What's the matter with these crazy looking people? Their military code is such that they're not going to give up, and they're going to fight to the last man. Well, by God, we'll kill them to the last man.
come up just on every call, but the bigger caves and things, well, we call for demolitions. Those boys would come up, we just blow them shut.
Our artillery regiment were firing point blank at any caves that they were told. But they were firing right over our heads. And they weren't more than a couple hundred yards behind us. Once the airport was taken and Marine pilots could land on the airfield, they were flying some of the shortest bomber runs ever made during World War II. No more than 500 yards to the top of the ridges of Bloody Nose Ridge and the Umberbogle pockets. And they were dumping napalm.
But the caves opened out on both sides of the ridges. And I know in one case, we attacked this particular series of caves up on the northern end, and a Piper Cub flew over and found out later that while we were attacking, the Japanese troops were out on the other side sitting around on the rock smoking cigarettes.
It was one hell of a lesson to be learned. Because we were finding a new enemy.
The night encounters were one of the reasons why combat in the Pacific was so exhausting and also so intense.
Well, on this particular night, I guess it was somewhere about 1 o'clock. I didn't have a watch, but I'm just guessing. It was about 1 o'clock. I heard a commotion, not in the first foxhole, but in the second foxhole from me on my right. And I got very tense and very listening and whatnot. And what had happened, this Jap had crawled in the foxhole with this guy. And what we were doing that night, I would stand watch. This guy would sleep, and that guy would stand watch. Every other one was on watch all the time. Well, this guy, it was his time to sleep, and he was laying in the foxhole, flat of his back, and that Jap got in the foxhole, sat on his stomach, and grabbed him around the throat and was literally choking him to death. And he said that he knew that he was dying. He could feel it, you know, his strength and all going from him. And he said, I just closed my eyes, and he said, I guess everything that I was ever taught about judo and jiu-jitsu and defense ran through my mind at a lightning speed. And he said, I come up with the only thing that I could think of. And he reached behind the Jap's head, caught him behind the head, and clawed his eyes out, or put the pressure on his eyes. And when he did that, the Jap broke his hold. He got up, grabbed that Jap, threw him over that cliff, which was approximately, I would guess, 60 feet down to the bottom of it, straight down. Not a slope, but straight down cliff. I have heard lots of cries, lots of screams, but that was the most blood-curdling scream that I have ever heard in my life.
One evening when one of our men, I don't know his name offhand, he was a late replacement, and he had cracked up during the night and screamed and screamed and screamed, and there seemed to be no way to stop him. And actually, we weren't supposed to fire or draw. We didn't want to draw the enemy's fire, and we didn't want them to know exactly where we were. So we had to quiet this man. He was alerting the whole line and causing a chaotic situation. So he was eventually killed by one of his own men with an entrenching tool in order to stop him.
Have you ever seen battle-fatigued Marines with the glaze in their eyes, their faces drawn? They have lost weight. They've have deteriorated into that battle, both physically and mentally. And there's not a whole lot of grab ass going on. There's not a lot of talking. Everybody is very solemn, very wore out, distraught.
Well, I think you feel stress But in those days, it wasn't defined quite that way. And it was something that you really controlled, because otherwise you yourself would consider it cowardice. One day I had a very good buddy that was in the 2nd platoon, and he and I went overseas together, and we pitched liberties together in Melbourne, Australia, and we were in the same platoon together on Cape Gloucester. And but when I came back from the hospital, why, he was still in the 2nd platoon. I got shoved up in the 3rd platoon, and all the changes, and I finally ended up with Bazooka Man. But he and I were always very close. And the 2nd day we're on the island, why, he was killed, 2nd night. And that really got to me. And later that day, we were going up the road, and it was just hotter than blazes, and the humidity was terrible, and flies and stench and so on. And I was thirstier than hell, and I said to, I don't know if it was Burgin or who, I said, I've got to get out of here. I said, I'm going to go ape. And so the corpsman came back to me, and so he pinned a tag on me, and he said, okay, you go back. And so I went back to, I guess it was a battalion aid station. And they gave me some salt tablets and said, go over there and sit in the shade. Well, I was greatly relieved just to be out of it, you know, and I felt just seeing Bob that morning. But later, I was sitting there in the safety of that overhead. Why, I thought to myself, God damn it, I'm not doing my job here. And so I got up and I walked back up the road and caught up with my outfit.
There's no way to describe how a human being can survive that kind of exhaustion, day in and day out. You had to be young, and you had to be, I guess, in good health.
They just go out of their head completely. Some of them scream, some of them cry, some of them are absolutely in another world. They're not anything connected with this right here. You know, they've lost it. You can tell it. I mean, there's no mistaking of identity when a man loses his sanity. You can spot it, and I mean spot it in a hurry.
We expected casualties. We didn't go in thinking that it was all going to be roses, you know.
It struck me with a fatal fascination was the way men fell. Sometimes they got hit and just pitched forward, just almost in a split second. And sometimes, typically with an explosion, they got hit and just threw up their arms and fell over backwards. And then on other occasions, they got hit and it seemed as though they just sagged down to the ground just because of extreme fatigue.
Yeah, I never knew a brain that wouldn't go. Well, some of them that didn't want to go. But I never knew a man that didn't go.
We would look and we'd watch our friends get killed, and we'd see our friends get wounded and so on, and you'd say to yourself, well, that's him, that's not me. In the back of your mind, you know, you could say, well, 2 minutes from now, it could be me. And that never quite leaves you.
October 13, 28 days on the island. The men of K-35 are still on the line, in a slow, methodical reduction of the enemy positions. The fighting on Peleliu is unrelentingly vicious.
First of all, when you speak of viciousness and hatred of the enemy, we still all had Pearl Harbor in the back of our mind. And we certainly had to repay them for that. And we were going to do that in spades.
I always had the feeling, take no prisoners, and don't let any of them escape. Kill him as quick as you can and as many as you can. And I carried that with me through all the campaign, and I think that helps a man to survive.
Some of the boys at Peleliu literally threw their bayonets away because they didn't want the officers to get any idea of, hold your fire and use the bayonet, the old World War I sort of thing. Because our philosophy was if you had an M1 rifle, it was semi-automatic, a found rifle, fired 8 times, why the hell fool with the damn bayonet? Because the Japs loved bayonet fighting and were good at it.
Many times when you see a Hollywood movie, you see the enemy get hit and he just blows up, dead as a doornail. It's over. That's not the case. I saw an enemy soldier on Negas running toward us across a clearing. He must have been possibly 150 feet when he started running. Our fire team must have raked him with over 50 shells, and he didn't stop till he was about 50 feet in front of us before he collapsed. He ran at least 100 feet with all those shells in him.
Officers tried to discourage the taking of any part of enemy bodies for souvenirs, but most Japanese soldiers had one or more gold crown teeth, and they just simply made souvenirs that were too tempting to Marines. And so when one or a group of Japanese was killed, that was the first thing that everybody went after was the gold teeth.
We proceeded to check them over for souvenirs. That's one of our sports. If you can pick up a good flag or a good rifle or any kind of a thing, well, that's pretty good trading. If you ever got back to the airport, you could trade it to some pilot that came in on the plane because they like to take souvenirs.
I distinctly remember one night a discussion in the tent among the Peleliu veterans about the possibility of scalps. But you couldn't take Japanese scalps because they had a crew cut. So that idea was abandoned. Skulls were another favorite souvenir, but they were a little more difficult for us to take because we were on the move, and they were, unless you could get them and take them back to the rear and then boil them in a big pot and then clean the brains out and squirt a hose in there, something like that.
The smell of those Japanese bodies that had been laying there, the blowflies landing on them, the hot sun beating down on those bodies, and they would bloat. And you just see those large flies jumping back and forth over the bodies. And if you were parked near them having coffee, chances are they'd land on your edge of your cup and maybe fall in. They were so fat because they've been having some dinner.
But it progressively got worse, according to visitors that came to see us, like airplane pilots. And the pilots that I've heard say that at 1,500 feet above, as they came in, at 1,500 feet, they began to get the proper word, the death smell.
So it was basically like 2 scorpions in a bottle. And so you land this Marine unit with its particular background and a bunch of basically high-spirited guys. At 85% of the division, we landed on Peleliu, had not reached the age of 21. And you land a bunch of guys like that are highly trained and highly motivated and physically toughened on an island that's 2 by 6 and that is defended by a crack Japanese division that's dedicated to fighting to the death for the emperor. And the only possible conclusion is the annihilation of one or the other force.
Time doesn't mean a damn thing when you're in combat. The only thing that you kind of pay attention to is daylight and dark.
Well, you know, you're tired, but somehow you just keep going.
The fella never questions it. That's your job. You're going in and take the island.
It wasn't just combat, it was combat with a vengeance.
The island of Peleliu was a big waste of manpower, lives of men.
You could never let any of your comrades down. What they thought of you was more important to you than anything else.
It was unthinkable to leave wounded so that the Japanese could get to them because we knew that they would torture them.
Overall, you wore down. And so we was wore down.
There was a lot of waste on Peleliu, a tremendous amount of waste on Peleliu. I was aware of it, very much so.
Our company is a company of 235 men with a few support outfits. So we'd have possibly 260 men on the line. Out of the 260 on Peleliu, 80, I think it was 82, 83 men survived.
To me, to see a man go down was a great personal tragedy because not only was it a life ending, but it didn't take us long to figure out on Peleliu that it was a life that was ending for no goddamn good reason. Because we were told we were taking the island to secure the airfield, to give MacArthur air support to invade the Philippines, and I don't recall the date now, but maybe we fought on Peleliu 10 days or something like that, and he walked ashore with grinding cameras, and we kept on slugging it out and losing men every day.
October 15, the 1st Marine Division is relieved by elements of the 81st Army. 2 weeks later, on October 30, the weary men of K-35 leave the island for which they had fought so long and so bloodily.
My thought was, thank God we're going to get off of this place. Well, we knew that's why we went over there, because we were just waiting for transportation. And I think that's why in that photograph we all look so happy, because we knew we were getting off that beach. And we were tired, even though we had smiles on our faces, we were tired and we were worn out.
Damn sure wasn't no difficult getting on that ship and getting the hell out of there, I'll tell you that.
They lowered a landing net, and we were to climb up the landing net to board the ship.
I got up about halfway and I just put my arm through the net and I just sitting there and resting, you know, and we all were doing that while we were going up.
But we were so weak from 30 days of fatigue and exhaustion on Peleliu that we could hardly climb the landing net. And some of the guys, when they got up to the top, they just fell over on the deck.
One of the dearest companies in the world. I love every man that was ever fought or was ever in it, deeply. Love every man that was there. And I know what he went through and what hell he has gone through on that. And I respect every one of them. I don't care where he's somebody or nobody. He's still got my respect.
They say once a Marine, always a Marine. But the way I describe that is, it's a scar that stays with you forever. And it's a scar that you're proud of. You've met the finest American men ever put on a battlefield. You've had the privilege of their company and the privilege of serving our country. There's just no outfit like the Marines. And I wouldn't sell a moment.
Start with, the 5th Regiment is a fighting son of a gun. We think so. Most anybody could probably whip us now. But, and of course, then you come down to 3rd Battalion and the K Company, and I spent my whole Marine Corps career in the K Company. So I have nothing else to compare with it. But we got what hell of a bunch of men.
Oh, I would like people to remember Peleliu for what we did there. For all the casualties we had to take it. I fought that battle. It was my war, and I want people to remember that I was there.
There's not a day goes by that I don't think about it. And when I do think about it, I try to force myself to think about, you know, the buddies, the good buddies I had, and some of the things that we did that were funny and things like that. But then you also remember the dead, and how many of them there were. And they were just snuffed out. And there's no way you can forget them.